Well, hello and welcome to another study in the book of Revelation. In this lesson, we want to study Revelation chapter 17. It deals with the great harlot, and chapter 18 will deal with the judgment of the great harlot. The great harlot represents, just cut to the chase, it represents the city of Rome. Rome and all of its lustfulness, its seductive power to get other kingdoms to follow it, and it's a bloodthirsty harlot of a city that persecutes the saints and drinks their blood. It's stated in chapter 17 and verse 18, and the woman whom you saw is the great city which reigns over the kings of the earth. So that makes it pretty clear who was reigning over the kings of the earth in the days of John, when the angel gives him an explanation for what this vision in chapter 17 is all about. He says it's the city that rules over the kings of the earth. Well, of course, the city of Rome ruled over the nations of the world in John's day. And so that would naturally be who he would understand it to be. And we need to understand the book and the things that it says in the context of John's time. The things in the book are written about things that were shortly to come to pass. So in this chapter, we have the obituary of Rome that is recorded for us in 17 and 18. What is going to cause this great power that is an enemy of God and the saints to come to an end? It describes all of her ugliness and cruelty and arrogance in this figure of a great harlot riding upon the beast out of the sea, the civil power of Rome. Some people have interpreted it as the apostate church or the Catholic Church during the Reformation period of time especially. All that seduces people away from God is sort of a spiritualized, symbolic look that some interpreters of Revelation have tried to apply. Premillennialists have tried to make it a false religious system of some kind, whether it's from the Hindus all the way to Unitarians. All kinds of different theories have been used. Some have said that it's the city of Jerusalem, but Jerusalem wasn't ruling over the kings of the earth. That doesn't fit. The world that I think the view that certainly early Christians understood, and John would have understood, and we ought to understand, it was the city of Rome viewed with all of its commercial power and worldly success. We're going to read in chapter 18 about how all the merchants of the earth were made rich by this city, and that when it was judged by God and it fell apart, that all of these merchants around the Mediterranean Sea were going to weep because they were no longer able to make profit from that great worldly city any longer. And again, that fits Rome. That doesn't fit Jerusalem or any place else. In the context in which we're studying things that must shortly come to pass, it points to Rome. Let's look at some other evidence from within the book itself. She sits on 7 hills in chapter 17 and verse 9. Ovid and Virgil and Bartiel and Horace, they all say that the city of Rome it was a city on the 7 hills. So the 7 mountains or hills are a way that all the ancient writers describe the city of Rome. It rules the earth in the days of John in 1718. Well, Rome ruled the earth in those days. You remember Augustus Caesar ordered a census to take a census of all of the inhabited earth, is the way the Roman Empire is described in Luke chapter 2 and verse 1. It's a terrible persecutor of the saints and drinks their blood in 17:6. In 18:20 and 24, she's being punished and brought to an end because of the way that she has slain the blood of the saints. Rome was a terrible persecutor, and the center of this Roman government and this persecution was the city of Rome. It's the leading commercial power of the earth, is the way it's described in chapter 18:3 and verse 11, and you can read further in that chapter, and we'll, Lord willing, study that next week. It is supported by the civil government that came up out of the sea, the empire of Rome and its military power is what the city of Rome sat upon and rode upon, and that's where the city of Rome got its power. was from that military and civil power that the Roman government had. It was profitable for the nations to be seduced by the city of Rome because they wanted that military power and civil power and wealth on their side. And later on, they're going to be destroyed by this military power itself. The empire is going to come apart. There'll be civil wars. Many of the client states will turn against them. The barbarians that they take into the country will turn against them, so on, and will bring Rome to its end. So the woman is Rome. She sits on the people and nations of the earth, and she has blasphemous names on her head, and everything about it fits the city of Rome. What's going to happen to this woman? Well, it's already been announced earlier in one of the headlines that was announced back in chapter 14 and verse 8 that the city is doomed to fall. In chapter 14:8 it said, and another angel, a second one, followed, saying, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, she who has made all of the nations drink of the wine of the passion of her immorality. In chapter 16 and verse 19, and the great city was split into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell, and Babylon the Great was remembered before God to give her the cup of the wine of his fierce wrath. So the woman's going to be pictured as having a cup in her hand that's golden that she can use to seduce the nations and drink the blood of the saints, but God's going to give her a cup, we're told. That's a cup of wrath that's going to bring that empire to an end. In looking at the harlot, she is an object of coming judgment. In verses 1 and 2, there's a description given of her. And one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and spoke with me, saying, Come here, and I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters, and with whom the kings of the earth commit acts of immorality. And those who dwell on the earth were made drunk with the wine of her immorality. So this city has great power, great beauty, great success. She's pictured as this woman that is a harlot, and the fall of the city is going to come from a great height. First John is shown the picture of how mighty and powerful and seductive this city is, but in the end it's going to be judged by God. You're more impressed when you see how powerful and arrogant and proud and seductive she is when you see her brought down in judgment by God. Think about Goliath, how he's introduced and how he mocked the armies of God for 40 days and what his great size was and how good his armor was. And then when David slew him, we recognize what great power was there on the side of David to bring that great champion down with that stone and with that young man. So the same way when we see the city of Rome with all of her power fall, it's going to be impressive how much power there is in God's providence to deal with his enemies. She sits on many waters, the nations upon which the woman sits. We're told in verse 15. We don't have to come up with an interpretation. The angel gives us the interpretation. She rules the world, this harlot, and she seduces others with acts of immorality, fornication, political power, economic power, religious, false religion of Caesar worship, and so on. All of that is used to seduce these nations into working together with her and also to persecute the church. As you look at this woman, she has alliances with the ancient world, and just like other nations had alliances that Israel made with the Syrians or with other nations, and that was always considered immorality, disloyalty to God. Well, this nation also is involved in her immoralities, her alliances, and her idolatry that she's spreading to try to unite the different parts of the Roman Empire together. So Rome was made up of all of her rich allies. When you think about the Roman Empire, it was, Italy was the Roman part, but then all of the other nations were conquered nations and nations that had entered into a covenant with the city of Rome and with its rulers. It's unclean, this harlot, because of her idolatry, her persecution of Christians, and the cup that she has in her hand is the blood of the saints that she drinks. In verse 3, and he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. So the harlot, we're given her description. The woman is seen in the wilderness in contrast with the church. We had that holy woman, the church, that was protected by God in the wilderness. And here we have in this chapter the enemy city, and out there in a place of desolation and drought and rubble. And the harlot is sustained not by the Lord like the woman that fled into the wilderness, but by the power of the Roman government, the military of the Romans. It's not the city of God, but it's the city of Rome that's being pictured for us. She's riding on a scarlet beast, the civil power of Rome that we saw back in Revelation 13. That 4th beast that was mentioned back in Daniel 7 that was indescribable. It's a vivid red color. The color of the dragon is also the color that the beast is pictured as here. So the empire holds up the city of Rome. The woman rides on this beast. It's a color of scarlet, is the color of splendor and distinction and royalty and sin. All of these things would be fit ways to describe the color of the beast. He has blasphemous names. They would say Caesar the divine, or Caesar is Lord, or God Domitian, were titles that these Caesars took on to themselves, and all of them were blasphemous names. In verse 4, and the woman was clothed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup full of abomination and of unclean things of her immorality. So she's clothed in purple and scarlet, those royal colors that the Caesars and the senators and so on would wear. She's rich and dressed rich on the outside, but in her soul she's wasted. She's royal, but she's disgusting, is the picture that is given. She's well dressed, but she's a tramp and a whore, is the way that she is pictured. She has a golden cup that she tempts the nations with, that are full of her immoralities. And she uses them to seduce others with her evil ways and with her wealth and trade. And God gave Babylon this power to be rich. Right? It says in the Old Testament, he allowed Babylon to be rich. And they used it for immorality and cruelty, and then they were judged. And the same thing's going to happen to this harlot in the book of Revelation, the great harlot of harlots. Whenever Rome would do, the nations would do with her and follow her, but there she's going to be judged by the things that happen. Verse 5, and upon her forehead a name was written, a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of abominations of the earth. So she is the great harlot. She has that name written on her forehead, that she is the greatest of all of the harlots. You know, all of the Old Testament kingdoms that were opposed to God were called harlots, whether it was the nations of Israel or Judah or the Assyrians or the people of Tyre or Babylon. They're pictured as harlots. But this is the harlot of all harlots, the Roman Empire. And she could teach all of the little harlots what to do. She's the world's greatest. She parades her shame before the world in opposing God and persecuting God's people. And she is like a boasting fornicator that you might hear about today, telling about all of his conquests that he's had. Or like a boastful drunk that should be ashamed of the fact that he's dominated by alcohol, but goes around boasting about their drinking bouts and their shameful behavior when they're drunk. Well, here, this woman is the same way. We say, and I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the witnesses of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered greatly. How horrible a picture is given of this city. that she's drunk, drinking the blood of all of those saints that have been put to death in the Colosseum and in other places in Rome because of their faith and because of their witness for Jesus Christ. She's drunk on the blood of God's holy people that are trying to go out and preach the gospel and tell others about Jesus. John is just amazed at this horror, at this decadence, at this cruelty of the city and this woman that rides upon this beast. Filled with cruelty, John is filled with curiosity and doubt about what does this represent? What is the meaning of this vision? Well, I've been saying what it means, but it's up to this point, John doesn't know what it means. But the angel's going to tell him who the woman is and what she represents. In verse 7, and the angel said to me, why do you wonder? I shall tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. So the angel's going to give us an explanation. So we have all of these figures that are being given, and now we're given some divine interpretation about what these figures represent. So this is the interpretation, like you get the interpretation of a parable by Jesus, the parable of the sower. He tells you what the things mean. The parable of the tares and the wheat, he tells you what it means. So there's no doubt about the interpretation. Well, here we're going to be told what this beast is, and the woman. It is this Roman Empire, and the woman sits on that, the city of Rome. So the angel's mission is to give an explanation of something that has not been clearly revealed to John, what this woman represents. The beast and the woman, they go together. They're indivisible. Her lust, the city of Rome, and her influence is what controls the beast. She's the source of the persecuting and the self-seeking, and she controls the empire. Well, the empire also supports her. At times, the beast supports the harlot city. It's what brings in all the wealth. It's what has all the power to enforce the things that the woman wants. So the two are connected and work together. Verse 8, and the beast that you saw was and is not and is about to come out of the abyss and to go to destruction. And those who dwell on the earth will wonder, whose name has not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they see the beast, that he was and is not and will come. So this seems to hearken back to what we studied in chapter 13, where we saw those 7 heads of the beast that came up out of the sea, and one of the heads was struck with a death blow, and it appeared that the beast was not, that he was dead. This persecuting power was gone, but then the persecuting power came back and went after the saints. So there was sort of a resurrection that happened. And we see the same kind of thing set forth by John. The persecuting civil power was active under Nero. That's when persecution first came upon the Christians. Then Nero was forced to commit suicide. And then there were 3 different generals that tried to take power, and none of them were able to last. In a period of 2 years, there was civil war and chaos. And then Vespasian came to the throne, and then his son Titus, and then Domitian. And Domitian, the beast came back. The beast began to persecute the church again. So at the time that John got the vision, and what he sees in this vision seems to have been during that time when there wasn't government persecution organized and carried out by the city of Rome and by the Roman Empire. It started with Nero, it went away, and John got the revelation. And then by the time the book was out and people were reading about it, then Domitian started up the persecution, sanctioned by the Roman government again against the church. So this persecution reemerged under Domitian. So it was, then it was gone, and then it's coming back. So the beast died with Nero, but this persecuting civil power came back against the church, came up out of the abyss from the devil to do his evil work once again when Domitian came to the throne. And the beast that you saw was and is not and is about to come up out of the abyss and to go to destruction. And those who dwell on the earth will wonder, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they see that the beast, that he was and is not and will come. So the people of the world will wonder how the Roman Empire was able to hold itself together after all of these civil wars, and it's able again to come back to full strength and to persecute the church. Tertullian said in his Apology, he lived in about 200 AD, was a preacher, and he wrote a book and said, "Consult your annals, and there you will find Nero, the first of the emperors who dyed his sword in Christian blood, when our religion was just arising at Rome." So Nero was the first persecutor. Eusebius says he's the church historian, the father of church history, is what Eusebius is known. He lived and wrote around the 325 or so. Domitian, finally showed himself the successor of Nero's campaign of hostility to God. So first you had Nero, then it was not, and then Domitian, the beast, comes back. He was the second to promote persecution against us, though his father Vespasian had planned no evil against us. With this agrees Tertullian, who said a long time after Domitian, a limb of bloody Nero, make some like attempt against the Christians. So the beast comes back when Domitian comes to the throne. The beast that was seen, again, the lost of the earth will just be dazzled at the coming of this evil one. Avoid this fascination, if you will, by focusing your eyes, I think John would say, on Jesus Christ, who is the true Lord and King of kings that everybody ought to pay attention to. No matter how great the success of this evil beast, it is on its way to destruction, the passage says. We know in the book of Daniel, it wore out the saints, made war with the saints in Daniel 7, but then God sat in judgment, the beast was slain, it came to destruction. And here in the book of Revelation, we're getting a whole book dealing with that same subject. But this beast, he comes back, he's going to persecute the saints, there's going to be trouble for the saints for a couple of 100 years, and then this beast will be taken out of the way. So no matter how great his success in evil, he's on his way to destruction. He has within himself the seeds of his own destruction, as we're going to see in this chapter, in verses 9 and 10. Here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits, and they are 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other is not yet come. And when he comes, he must remain a little while. So he gives us an interpretation. This is what the angel says these things represent. He says these 7 heads are the 7 mountains, the 7 hills of Rome, upon which the woman sits and where the city is located. And it also represents a second thing. It represents 7 kings. He tells the readers that 5 of them have already come and gone. Well, let's look at the Roman emperors. The first Roman emperor was Augustus. Julius Caesar was a dictator, and he was killed by members of the Senate, Brutus and Cassius, and the Roman Republic went on. And then Octavius was given the name Augustus. He became the first emperor of Rome. So there's one. Tiberius was second. Gaius or Caligula was the third. Then Claudius. Then Nero was number 5. And then Nero was forced to commit suicide. That was the end of the line, the first family, the Julian family from Julius Caesar. After he died, Galba, Otho, and Vitellius all were just a few months. They were able to hold things together, and there was civil war among the different generals trying to seize the power there in Rome and to be the emperor. Well, finally, Vespasian, whose army was besieging and fighting against Jerusalem and the Jews, he came back. He left his son Titus in charge, came back to Rome, and then you have the Flavian family took over. Vespasian became an emperor for 10 years. And then it says one is about to come. So John sees this vision probably at the very last days of Vespasian. He was on the Isle of Patmos, probably through some local persecution in Ephesus. He was exiled out there to Patmos, and he gets the vision. So the beast, the number 6 is there. Then there's going to be number 7, which is Titus. He only lasted for 2 years. And then following Titus, Vespasian's other son, Domitian, came to the throne. And we're given a description. And the beast, which was and is not, is himself also an 8th. And he is one of the 7, and he goes to destruction. So you got up to Titus, and then number 8. Number 8 is really one of the 7, he says. He is another Nero, just like the early Christians described him. He's the bloody limb of Nero. He is a reincarnation, spiritually speaking, of Nero, number 5. He is a persecutor of Christians that sheds their blood and puts them to death and makes a policy throughout the empire to persecute Christians. So he is the beast reborn that comes up out of the pit and has started this persecution. So he's a resurrected persecutor, and he's just like Nero. And now the beast that was not is now back under this emperor. Verses 12 and 13. And the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings, who have not yet received a kingdom, but they receive authority as kings with the beast for 1 hour. These have one purpose, and they give their power and authority to the beast. So you have the 10 horns of the beast are represented. These 10 horns represent 10 kings. They rule along with the Caesar. They rule along with Rome. They are client kingdoms. When you look at a map of the Roman Empire, you have Italy, which is Roman, but then they conquered these other nations, put puppet rulers on the throne, made alliances with other kingdoms. That's what made up the Roman Empire. It's pictured as 10 different kings that all support the Roman government. They all have one purpose: to obey what the Caesar says. They are promoting this Caesar worship and persecution of the church because that's what Caesar and Rome want. And they're zealous to persecute the church. So Rome's inner weakness that's pictured in the statue, where the iron represented the Roman Empire, but it had legs of iron, but its feet were partly of iron and partly of clay because it was made up of different seeds of men. Some were strong and some were brittle. The Roman Empire is made up of all of these client kings and client kingdoms that make up the Roman Empire. It makes it strong in one sense, but in another sense it is weak. And it's upon the feet that God's, the stone hits on the feet. And it has to do with those client kings. That's what makes the Roman Empire weak and causes it to fall apart. It's one of the reasons why the Roman Empire fell. It's because it was not a completely united empire in its blood. Verse 14. These will wage war against the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them, because he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And those who are with him are the called and the chosen and the faithful. Here's the key verse in the book of Revelation that explains the overall view that we need to get from the book. If we don't understand all of the individual symbols and things, if we get some of that wrong, we understand the main conflict. And that is all of these kings and this city of Rome, and the military power of Rome, and the false Caesar worship of Rome. All of those enemies that Satan has raised up are warring against Jesus Christ. And they're warring against those that serve Jesus Christ. And the Lamb of God will overcome them all. Jesus will win in the end. Well, we can look back in history and see that all of this has been fulfilled. All of the great power of Rome, all of the schemes of the devil were turned against Jesus Christ and his rule. But who triumphed? Jesus Christ is still on his throne. He's still ruling here 2,000 years later. And Rome is in the dustbin of history. So be faithful to Jesus Christ no matter what civil power is persecuting the church. No matter what false religion is bringing persecution to God's people. Know that Jesus Christ is on the throne. And if we stay faithful to him, we will overcome, because he's Lord of Lords and King of Kings. And the destiny of the world is in his hands and no one else's. And those that are faithful to him are the ones that are truly called and chosen and faithful. They're the ones that truly have obeyed the gospel and truly are loyal to him and shown themselves worthy to be called children of God, that they stay faithful unto death. Then in verse 15, and he said to me, the waters on which you saw were where the harlot sits, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. So this city of Rome, this harlot, sits upon waters in the vision. What are the waters? The angel says these are all of the different ethnic groups and nationalities that make up the Roman Empire. Again, its weakness is its inability to make and amalgamate all of these diverse people into one. Part of the idea of Caesar worship was to try to give some spirit of unity to all of these different nations, get them to worship the government, to hold it all together. Rome had conquered all of this and controlled it all by force, and they didn't have the cement, the adhesive power to hold it all together forever. Eventually, this Roman Empire was going to come apart, and it would be destroyed. Daniel chapter 2 and verses 42 and 43, and as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of pottery, so some of the kingdom will be strong and part of it will be brittle. And in that you saw the iron mixed with common clay, they will combine with one another in the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, even as iron does not combine with pottery. So we're picturing here again that internal weakness that was revealed in the book of Daniel about the fourth kingdom, the Roman kingdom. And the 10 horns which you saw, and the beast, these will hate the harlot, and will make her desolate and naked, and will eat her flesh, and will burn her up with fire. So all of these nations that make up the Roman Empire, it's pictured as one day they will turn against the city of Rome. One day they'll side with the barbarians. One day they'll go with the other powers that are invading Rome, and the city of Rome will be sacked and will be destroyed, and its influence and power will be taken away, and that ancient city and harlot will be slain. And it's pictured in very apocalyptic terms that you find in the books of the prophets, where her flesh is eaten as she is fallen. So it's savage, powerful enemies will come in and oppress and carry out their vengeance on behalf of God. She'll be burned. It's a punishment for hideous sins, and sexual immorality was to burn someone that acted as a harlot. Well, that's what's going to happen to the city of Rome. Then in verse 17, for God has put it in their hearts to execute his purpose by having a common purpose and by giving their kingdom to the beast until the words of God should be fulfilled. God allowed this Roman Empire to arise, to bring about his purpose. And all of these kingdoms that make up the Roman Empire work together. You had a world at peace when the gospel was introduced. There were roads built throughout the Roman Empire. They had the common language of Greek that they were all speaking. So everything was set up by the providence and will of God for this beast, this fourth kingdom, to be the time when the gospel was preached. It's also the perfect instrument to test whether Jesus Christ is truly Lord, or is civil power in the kingdoms of men, are they Lord? Well, they persecute the church, and they go against the church and try to destroy Jesus Christ's rule, and they're unsuccessful. That's what the book of Revelation shows. The kingdom belongs to Christ. He's Lord of Lords and King of Kings. God, through his providence, is able to rule over the kingdoms of men and carry out his purpose. And we see that in a number of places throughout the Old Testament. Only God knows how that providence works. It's not revealed to us how it all works. But he knows all of the ways to influence people's minds, to influence history, to raise up kings and bring them down, to control the weather. God has all of the switches that control all of the natural laws in this world. And he uses that providence to do his will. We know that he turned the Midians when Gideon with his 300 were on the mountain, and they let their torches shine and blew the trumpets. Those Midianites in the dark fought against one another, the different tribes that made them up, and began to kill each other. God was in control over those things. We're told a similar thing happened when the Ammonites against Mount Seir in Jehoshaphat's day, that they fought against each other and killed each other, so that the Israelites under Jehoshaphat didn't have to do anything in order to win the battle. They just came and picked up the spoil when it was all said and done. So God controls the raising up of this kingdom, this city of Rome, and he'll bring it down when the proper time comes. Verse 18, and the woman whom you saw is the great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth. So there the angel of God tells us who the woman is. The harlot is Rome. That's the great city that ruled. There's no other city that would have come to John's mind or to the 7 churches that got the letter. They wouldn't have thought of any other city than the city of Rome. She's the mistress of the nations, this one that seduces the nation. So Rome used all of this lust of the flesh and seduction and allurements of wealth and power to get all of the other nations to follow along. Well, I hope that this will help you to have some better understanding of these things, that you'll study them out further. And remember, here we have the interpretation that is given by the angel about what the central ideas about this woman is all about. Well, next week we'll look at the fall of the city, her destruction, and all the weeping that takes place by all of those that have been trading with her. I hope this lesson will be a blessing to you. It'll give you a lot to think about. You'll look up the references that are found in the notes and take some extra time to study and meditate on these things.